Hello, in this video we will be looking at the poem Northwest by Caroline Duffy. Just to look at a little bit of context, in 1971 Caroline Duffy, then aged 16, went to a gig by the Liverpool poet Adrian Henry, who was 23 years her senior, and basically fell for him. In 1974 she applied to the University of Liverpool to read philosophy, basically to be near Henry, and the pair became a couple for more than a decade. It's likely then that the poem Northwest is inspired to some extent by Duffy's romantic relationship with Henry, which ended some point in 1982. The two did remain friends until Henry's death in 2000, and this is an event that's commemorated by the next poem in the collection, Death and the Moon. Looking at the title itself, Northwest is obviously a compass point, and this might be significant to the poem in a number of ways. Firstly, the poem itself is set in Liverpool, a city in the northwest of England, and this helps to situate the poem in a geographical location. Also, the fact that northwest is an intercardinal direction, that is, it lies between north and west, might suggest the divergent paths that the principal figures in the poem took, and then the musings of the speaker as to what might have been if they'd continued to share the direction that their lives had been heading in. The aim of this video really is to help you firstly articulate an informed personal creative response to the poem, and the close reading that follows should support you in analysing ways in which meanings are shaped in the poem. Let's make a start. However it is we return to the water's edge, where the ferry grieves down by the pier head, we do what we always did and get on. Starting with a conjunction, however, we begin in medias res, with the phrase suggesting that the unfolding action is in some way inevitable. This idea of returning denotes coming back to a particular place, but also attempting through memory to go back to a time in the past. The poem mourns this personal history, an unlived life that can't really be revisited. The noun edge is suggestive of being on the cusp of something, perhaps even in a state of discomfort, or perhaps at a point of embarkation they are getting onto the ferry physically. And the personification of the ferry grieves. Even inanimate objects here seem to share the sorrow of the speaker. P ahead, capital P, capital H, proper nouns. These help to root the poem in a real place. We do what we always did. The polyptoton of do and did, the conjugation of the same verb, with the adverb always suggests a familiar, repeated pattern of behaviour. So there's the suggestion here that this is something that they used to do a lot to catch the ferry, and that by repeating this action they're somehow trying to get back in touch with their past. The idea of getting on board with this, literally boarding a craft, in this case a ferry, but also the colloquial meaning to get on board with something. Both of the figures in the poem are essentially agreeing to participate in this venture of attempting to travel back into the past. The city drifts out of reach. The sentence suggests it's the city rather than the boat the speaker is a passenger of that is being removed from their grasp or influence. And perhaps this is the beginning of the understanding that they can't actually get back in touch with the past. The relationship can't return to what it was. A huge silvery bird, a kiss on the lip of the wind. And the use of caesura here, the full stop in the first line that we can see here, and the enjambment, the run-on line, makes this at first appear to be a metaphor for the city. The city appears as a huge silvery bird. But then this is merged into a metaphor, a kiss on the lip of the wind, that's actually describing a seagull following their craft. And this ambiguity seems to add an insubstantial, disconnected feel to the poem. This is where we were young. Now this phrase also seems to be ambiguous. It conflates notions of time and place, where the place and we were young at the time. And the association of this place with a particular experience in these speakers' earlier life is so strong that she feels as if she could just go to somewhere in the city and relocate her past as if it was a geographical location. But this geographical location is only an X on a wave, like a hidden treasure. But the X is just floating detritus on a wave. It's not permanent. You can't really get to it. And this is an oxymoronic image, just combining associations of flowers with beauty. And then we move from there to the symbolism of perhaps a funeral wreath with a mention of a grave representing the death of those past hopes for love, family, and happiness, which themselves are emphasized by the tricolon structure at the end here. It's an enumeration of loss and its remnants, the memories, the ghosts, if you will, and this creates a rather poignant sense of desolation. Now, you may have picked up on this yourselves. I hadn't mentioned it until this point. What we have is the poem is written in a sonnet structure, and at this point in the poem we have the volta, the turn, a change in perspective, and here what changes is the time scale comes back to the present, and the protagonists look back at the skyline, wondering what we lost in the hidden streets. And the collocation of the verb lost and the adjective hidden here does create a feeling of something once was, that was squandered and is now, they realise, irrecoverable. Rented rooms, the alliteration here draws our attention to the fact that they used to stay in rooms rather than houses or apartments, rented rather than owned, and this is suggestive of young people sharing accommodation, perhaps out of economic necessity, and this is almost certainly something that Duffy would have experienced as a student in Liverpool. Interesting use of the word punters here. Punters is an informal, derogatory term really for customers, and what we see with the use of this word, no more than punters now in a tourist boom, is the reduction of the couple from their former feelings of belonging as inhabitants of the city to that of mere visitors to this particular place and time. Finally, we have the rhyming couplet that ends the sonnet. Above our heads the gulls cry, yeah, 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 frets of light on the river, tearful air. The yeah, yeah, yeah here is likely to be an allusion to the Beatles' song She Loves You. This is perhaps mocking the personal elegy of the speaker as the gulls' squawks remind her of the lyrics of the song. And this points perhaps, or arguably, to the idea that this poem is a move away from the concerns of politics and identity to the more strictly personal material that might be observed in the poems towards the end of this collection. Nevertheless, poignant as the words of the title, She Loves You, might reflect the unspoken sentiment desired by the speaker of her companion in relationship to this union between them that never really flourished or ended at some point in the past. We have the Beatles finishing their song. They use the word fret in the last line. It's interesting. A fret might be a raised bar on an instrument, like a fret on the guitar. And this creates an image of regular, clearly defined reflections of light on the water. So these evenly spaced lines of light on the water. But there is another meaning to the word fret, in that we might fret about something. So this refers to the state of anxiety, and something might fret or fray as in it comes apart. So there's also an association with the idea of erosion. So this mention of the light on the water could be counted as pathetic fallacy, referring to anxiety, referring to erosion, something that's gradually being lost. that is in keeping with the rest of the poem. And then more pathetic fallacy, the rain or spray from the river is expressing the sorrow of the speaker. Rounding off the final rhyming couplet, the poem ends with this minor sentence, tearful air. And that really just adds to the feeling of sorrow and lack of fulfillment in the poem. Structurally, this is also developed from the predominantly half rhymes in the poem. Here we have a full rhyme in the final rhyming couplet. Now, in terms of exploring connections across literary texts, if we're looking at other poems in the collection Feminine Gospels, we could definitely link this poem to Wish and Death and the Moon. Together with Northwest, this creates a trilogy of poems that arguably stand out from the rest of the collection as being more personal reflections on the themes of love and loss. If we were going to make a connection, as you might do in your exam, to Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire, we might note that Blanche's character is largely defined by failed relationships. Primary amongst these is the death of her husband, Alan Gray. Incidentally, Blanche was the same age, 16, when she met Alan as Duffy was when she met Henri. I was a very young girl. When I was 16, I made the discovery, love, all at once and much, much too completely. And then on his death, the searchlight which had been turned on the world was turned off again, and never for one moment since has there been any light that's stronger than this kitchen candle. Another past relationship of note for Blanche is her relationship with Shep Huntley, who's a former suitor of Blanche's, whom she met again a year before her arrival in New Orleans whilst vacationing in Miami. This is of significance in the play because as Blanche's mental stability deteriorates, her fantasy that Shep is coming to rescue her intensifies. We can see from the quote there, she creates this fantasy of him getting contact to invite her on a cruise of the Caribbean. In terms of considering the themes from modern times literature from 1945 to the present day, we can argue that the poem is concerned with personal and social identity, changing morality and social structures, and gender. So whereas we might follow the argument put forward here in Choosing Tough Words, the poetry of Carol Ann Duffy, that the final poems Wish, Northwest, and Death and the Moon, after a teasing return to the lyrical voice, issues of gender identity are temporarily suspended. We could also argue that these issues are still prevalent in the poem, in that this elegy for a failed relationship might still relate to ideas of personal and social identity, gender and social structures. Pause the video for a moment to consider this quote from Haytock's The Readjustment of Personal Relationships, Marriage, Modernity and the Alienated Self. We might suggest that the speaker's hope of, if not marriage, then certainly a long-term relationship, is buying into this illusion with the assumption that life would definitely have been better had the relationship continued, if the couple had stayed together and had children, that each partner would offer fulfillment by completing the other in some way. And all of this would ignore the reasons, products of individual desires, that the relationship did fail. So there's certainly a debate to be had in reference to this poem as to whether it can be thought of as separate and purely personal reflection on love and loss, or if we can still relate it to these wider issues of, as we've said, personal and social identity, gender, and social structures. I certainly hope that you found this video to be of some help. Please look out for more on Feminine Gospels in the future. Thank you for listening.